Hi guys, my name is Lisa Whitehouse and I'm the artist behind Whitehouse Art. Thank you for joining me today for one of my mini tutorials. Be sure to hit subscribe if you want to see other videos like this one. Let's get started. Alright, so for today we're going to be painting a sunflower with watercolors. So first things first, we'll just do a basic outline of a sunflower. It's not too hard to draw. There's the big circle in the center and just kind of deciding how big you want the sunflower to be. There's a lot of different types of sunflowers, so it's not too important to have it exact. I'm not even pulling up a reference photo for this piece. Just drawing some petals. And like I said, you don't need it to be too exact. This is just giving me a basic idea of how big I want the shape to be, and that way I can get started. So for the center, we're going to be doing a little bit of purple, a little bit of blue, a little bit of browns, some blacks. So first things first, we want to fill in the center with all water. Then I'm going to add my blue that I mentioned just up here a little bit. And then we're going to take that Payne's gray and then move it all around. The Payne's gray essentially is black, but it dries quite gray, so you do have to layer it to get a really solid black out of it, which is what I like, because I actually like when the watercolor is a bit more layered versus just going in with a lamp black and getting a solid black right off the bat. And I'm going to take in a little bit of it's like a rust brown, and just drop it in here. Just add a little bit of variation here. And that's all I'm going to do for the first layer of the center. So now I'm going to start on some of the petals. So some people would put down clear water everywhere for a painting like this, but I'm actually going to have a little bit more control with this painting. I'm going to start out and I'm going to make sure that I'm leaving a small space between the center of the flower and the petals, as to not have the center completely bleed in. At a certain point in the painting, we will actually want that to happen a little bit, but in order to maintain control of it and not have the black bleed everywhere, we're going to start by leaving a thin line. So if you have your yellow go down first, so I'll take a little bit, a mix of yellow, ochre, and like a bright yellow. I'm going to start by doing this. So if we do yellow petal, and this isn't something I usually do with watercolor. Normally I would lay down clear water completely and just drop it in. I'm going to throw in a little bit of orange. And then what I like to do, and this is with real loose watercolor, is I take clear water and I actually tell the yellow where I want it to go outside of the petal. So I would just drop it in. And I would have a little clear water here, clear water here, and see how the yellow just kind of follows it. And so I'm not putting all this clear water down first, I'm putting it down after, so I can control more where it's going to go. So we're going to keep going with the painting. So this time I actually am going to do a bit of clear water first. We're going to drop down the yellow again, and it's going to follow the yellow that I had already put down. Oops, I touched the middle a bit. That's okay. And so we're going to follow that same pattern where I take clear water and I'm just going to butter it up again, because I'm trying to keep this nice and loose. And we're going to spin our way around. Because I don't have a defined shape for this sunflower, it is a little bit looser than even I normally would. Sometimes I define it a little bit more, but this is just a practice run. We're just having fun with it today. So I'm going to throw in a little pink, keep things fun. It's always good to have a little bit of variation. So we can throw in a little more clear water there. Oops. See, I grabbed from the middle again, but the middle's already starting to dry, so it's not as big of a deal at this point if that happens. At the beginning, when it's quite dark, it's going to cause you more trouble. And actually, now that it is drying, it might be nice to butt these up and let it kind of bleed out a little bit. we are going to be going over the center a bit, so now it's allowed to sort of do its own thing a little bit. So throw some clear in here again and let that bleed in. You can kind of get the idea now of what I'm doing, just making my way around. Adding quite a bit of yellow in this one because I want to have it actually bleed out again. Painting is quite loose. Orange there. I like to, as parts are drying, sort of come back to them a little bit. It can be nice to always be kind of bouncing around, because there's different stages that the painting, that the watercolor will dry at, and when it's sort of at that medium dry phase, it doesn't bleed as much as it bleeds when it's freshly wet. Throwing in a bit of pink again. And then in order to loosen up some of this, I'm going to take clear water again and just kind of go like that. You can see now there's not a lot of rhyme and reason to where I let the paint bleed and don't bleed. Just kind of wherever it feels right to have it a little looser. I'm going to grab a little red this time, because why not? I'm going to skip over to this spot now. Said, just keeping it loose here, you just touch there. So because this was quite wet, it's going to bleed quite a bit more. We're almost all the way around. I'm not too careful with it. This stage is just about getting down some color, and then we'll go back around and do the same thing, but adding yet another layer on top. So now I'm just looking for more balance. So I'm noticing this is quite far out, so I want to pull out this a little bit more so that it doesn't look quite so heavy over there. And then I actually want to throw in a little bit of green in the background. So I'm going to go like this, and then I'm going to add a tiny bit of green. To represent some foliage. A bit of green up here. Sometimes a nice dry brush on the page can be a nice texture too. The dry brush is where you let the brush get completely dry and you kind of just pull it down. And if you take your brush wet and then pull it dry up to a petal, it'll create a nice texture as well. So one example I'll do over here is where you go up like this and then you pull it back down and you can see there's texture on the page. And that's what I kind of like in a painting like this. All right, so now we can go back to the center and add a little bit more detail there. So I'm going to take the Payne's Gray and start adding all my little dots. I'm using a round brush for this. It's okay if it bleeds into the petals at this stage because we're wanting to have a little bit of black on them. I'm actually going to go in and add some on them. So because I don't want it to be too strong of black, I'm actually going to take a dry brush now and lift up a little bit of the black I've laid down. I use a dry brush a lot as a technique of controlling the paint. So you'll notice I'm always drying it off on a paper towel, and that allows me to have a little bit more control when I'm working in the painting. So now what we're going to do is work our way around all over again, and just with a whole nother layer of color. So we're going to do the same thing we did before, clear water first and then the paint over top. And if you touch some of that center, that's good. And so this is just adding a little more detail on this round. The goal of this painting is not to see a perfect sunflower, but be able to tell it's a sunflower. And be able to have sort of that loose style. So you don't need too much control. The basic outline is all you're wanting, not each little detail. And throwing in random colors to it is really nice. So throwing in that red, we're gonna throw in some pinks, some more green. Sometimes when I have it wet like this, I like to add a few splatters over top because you can really see them bleed in. And some of them, you'll really see the shape. Some of them will bleed in, and I think that's a nice look. Take a little green. A little in the center. And then keep going. I find I don't do a lot of flowers usually because they require quite a lot of patience as you move your way around. It's a lot of repetitive movements. And I tend to be drawn to more paintings that have eyes. So I do a lot of wildlife, dogs, that sort of thing. But every now and again it is fun to try out something like this. Just see how I feel about it. Black here. Oh, it's bleeding more than I like, and that's where that dry brush comes in, where I just use a dry brush to sort of control it a little more because we didn't want the black to bleed all the way up. I'm just massaging into the center of the flower a little bit so that it's not this strong, dark line. So I think what we're going to do is let this layer dry now. Actually, before we do that, I'm just going to do a little more of the droplets that you saw there. So taking some of my bright yellows and just adding some over top. I like to add clear droplets over top of the yellow droplets. And that really changes their variation in size. So adding a few green ones in here and there. So once this dries, we're going to come back in, add a bit more detail to help clean this up a little bit because it's very loose right now. But that's what you want to see for this second coat. So let's let this dry, and when I come back, I'll show you how to add that detail. All right, so now we're on the final layer of the sunflower. We're going to do a few little details and finish it off. So we're going to be doing a lot with the fine brush. I have a fine round brush here. So we're going to do some little dots around the edge to help define the center of the flower a little bit. Not completely, but just a little bit. And so you'll just be doing little dots here and there to define where the center begins and ends. And then from some of those, we're going to do the odd line kind of jetting out. And not the whole way, just certain ones. And so we'll make our way around the whole painting. I'm going to come with other colors to do this, but we're just going to start with the black. And because at the top I kept it a little lighter, we're going to also not have quite as many dots towards the top too. So next I'm going to take some of the yellow ochre and do the same thing starting at the bottom. I'm going to do some lines just to add a little more definition. So here we can let some of these go all the way. And this is where that loose background will still show through, but some of this definition will come to the forefront. I'm going to add a little bit of red over top. I like to sort of mix it up as I go around, see what feels right. Because this one's very yellow already, I'm going to use some more red here. Use a little pink on this one. we'll just keep going around. I'm gonna bring in a little more black here. Sorry, Payne's gray. And then I'm actually gonna define this one a little bit out here. Take a bit of the green and do some odd little sections with green here and there. We're nearing the end now. Right, so I'm just kind of taking a look, seeing where I want to add a little bit more of the Payne's gray. I feel like this petal here could use a little more definition. Maybe a little up here. Other than that, I feel like it's fairly well balanced. Now the only other thing I wanted to do is add a few little white dots on it. So for that, I like to use something called poster paint. It's quite opaque. Some people use masking fluid to mask out the white areas at the beginning, and that's a perfect way to do it, but I prefer to use the poster paint after. It's just a fun and easy way to add little pops of white on the flower. And then, last but not least, I'm actually going to add a few white lines as well. And for that, I have a Jelly Roll size 10 pen. And I'm just going to, on the odd one, add a few white lines. As long as it's dry, you can, or mostly dry, you can do this. All right, so that is it. I'm quite happy with that. Once it's fully dry, I can decide if I want to go back and add any detail, but just based on the way I see it right now, I think it's ready to be signed off on. So I take my red and add my signature. I almost always sign in red. It's just the thing I like to do, but if red clashes with the painting, I'll sometimes use a different color. All right, that's it. So I hope you enjoyed painting your sunflower with me. Thank you guys for joining me today. I hope you guys had fun. Be sure to check out my other videos for more inspiration and leave a comment below with some ideas that you want to paint. Thank you and see you next video.